What's up everyone, the Autistic Scyther here, and this is part 2 of my top 10 favorite Fire Emblem Awakening characters. And in all fairness, is for those that want to know, part 1 is up on my channel at this moment. So for those that want to watch that video, well, I highly suggest this. I suggest you, and see the first part, I suggest you basically watch part 1 to see what my number 10 to 6 entries are for this list. Before moving on to this video, before watching this video, okay? Now, without further ado, let's move on to the next second half of my top 10 favorite Fire Emblem Awakening characters list. Moving on next at number 5, we have Henry. And is it even any surprise that both halves of both parts of these videos start off with a Dark Mage? In fact, it's even further surprising that the Dark Mages from Fire Emblem Awakening are both start this list. And it really does say a lot. And while I do like Tharja, I like Henry just a little bit more. Since when it comes down to it, while Tharja somewhat leans into and slightly subverts the idea of a Dark Mage, Henry completely subverts it, while Dark Mages are normally just doom and gloom and evil. Well, Henry is basically just the complete opposite. Always happy-go-lucky and energetic, always willing to crack jokes. And he's become one of my favorite Dark Mages in the Fire Emblem franchise, which naturally says a lot considering characters like Ophelia, Lysithea, and Hubert exist. But even with that, Henry is one of my favorite Dark Mages for the sheer fact of his entire bombastic personality and how his crit quotes tend to basically show how very easily and how excited he gets whenever he's slinging dark magic spells and curses around. And honestly, kind of makes him that much more enjoyable. And plus, keep in mind, I really like crows since they're my favorite bird. Since, again, I like the Pokemon Murkrow, but specifically the Pokemon Honchkrow. And Henry has given Henry has given me much more of a bigger respect for the humble crow. And what's even further, well, Chugga Conroy got me into getting interested in the Xenoblade Chronicles franchise. You gotta admit, Henry was part of that, because one of the rare blades in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Corrin, is an exact carbon copy of Henry. Okay, Monolith Soft, you got my attention. Thank you. Moving on next at number 4, and speaking of characters that wouldn't be on that many people's radar, Olivia. And naturally, when it comes down to it, I'm not one of the biggest fans of the dancer class. And that really says a lot once you realize a lot of my favorite characters are of the dancer class, like Azura or Seedall. And heck, some of the older games have had some very solid representatives of the dancer class as well, like Ninian in Blazing Sword and the Herons in the Teleus duology. That being said, when you first meet Olivia, she's basically seen as your standard shrinking violet, basically afraid of her own shadow. But even though she is more or less very afraid of everything and more or less willing to keep to herself. She basically knows how to step up to the plate and really show her strength when it counts. And honestly, the fact that she's the first ever dancer to utilize swords really says a lot. And heck, even further are her interactions with many different characters, as she basically bonds with Donald over a song from an old musical theater production. She's able to basically help Henry tap in more emotions than just pure happiness, as well as bonding with him over their love of animals. And then and with Lonq'u, well, while I have yet to see a support between the two of them, it's kind of interesting to see how well they interact with each other, especially since it was Lonq'u since Lonq'u looks up to Basilio, who basically helped save Olivia from her life of, servitude. And I was, in my current Iron Man playthrough of Fire Emblem Awakening, I was completely floored when I was able to pair Chrom with Olivia. And granted, I had to do a bit of a rigmarole and a few complicated measures in order to make that happen, but honestly, it's one of the best things I've ever done. And plus, she gave us one of the more interesting child units of Awakening in Inigo. And oh my god, the fact that it was her that more or less became one that basically helped him come out of his shell and becoming the flirtatious rogue that we know him as really does say a lot. Even though she is kind of embarrassed at what her future self actually did. So, yeah. And in all fairness, I guess she'd be even more embarrassed if she basically learned about him going over into the Fates world. Yeah, food for thought. Moving on next at number 3, we have Robin. And oh boy, yeah, I know Robin, a lot of people when they make a lot of YouTubers or FETubers when they made their top 10 best Fire Emblem Awakening characters list, they tend to disqualify Robin from these lists because he's too good. However, honestly, I'm not disqualifying him, and honestly, I say the reason that makes Robin perfect for this list is because he's so good. To be honest, I love all of the Avatar characters that have been in more modern Fire Emblem games, except Chris. But then again, who actually doesn't like Chris, or doesn't not like Chris? I hate that double negative. That being said, Robin is one of the more interesting characters, since when you first meet him, he or she, if you decide to go for female Robin, are basically found on the ground, basically dealing with a unfortunate case of amnesia. And they basically go throughout the entire game just trying to find out who they are. And honestly, it's one of the best things, since you're basically going along with them, finding out everything about them. And even in the time skip, after defeating Gangrel and when you face off against the Valmy's Empire and eventually Grima, when you discover their doppelganger that is basically seemingly enough, her secret sibling, and later on being the evil dragon Gerome. Honestly, that's one of the best moments that we ever see I've ever seen in my life. And it's kind of fun to say the least. And again, like most characters like Olivia, Robin's interactions are actually pretty amazing. That being said, I'm not going over most of Robin's supports here, because I'm going to possibly do a list involving many of the different avatar supports, like Robin, Corrin, Byleth, and maybe a Lear. So, stay tuned for that in the near future. So, yeah. That's a lot. Moving on next at number 2, we have Sumia. And yeah, honestly, for those that already don't know, I like anything that's canon in these games. And honestly, for the longest time, whenever I've played through Fire Emblem Awakening, I've always paired Chrom and Sumia together because it's basically canon to the entire game. Also, yeah, I kind of like the pie support, but even with that, in Fire Emblem Awakening, Sumia is one of the few characters who ends up becoming one of my most surprisingly broken units in the game. And yeah, this goes along even with characters like Felix or Leon or Lapis. Sumia is just one of the more characters that are easily one of the most versatile characters. And keep in mind, I played through casual mode a lot. So basically, whenever it comes down to it, I always tend to go with Sumia as my old reliable. And honestly, it really does say a lot. And granted, while I don't have her as my Fire Emblem waifu like Blazing Knight, I can actually imagine she's basically one of the more sweeter characters we've seen in the game. Kind of fitting that at my Fire Emblem Awakening Iron Man Marathon, I guess you could say I wised up and decided to pair her with Robin. And honestly, I'm not disappointed in the slightest. That's for sure. Finally, we have number 1. And finally, at number 1, we have Owain. Yep, that's right. One of the most bombastic characters ever in Fire Emblem Awakening. And honestly, he definitely deserves the number 1 spot. Because, honestly, everything about Owain screams nerd. I mean, keep in mind, when it comes down to it, Owain's one of the most enjoyable characters. From the first time you meet him in his paralogue, he shows up basically like a full-on chosen hero. And he basically ends up defeating the bandits. And it's almost like a full-on avenger of justice. The fact that he references past Fire Emblem games in most of his lines, and heck, even his standard Chunibyo phase is one of the best. Chunibyo pose is one of the best. And honestly, he has some of the most funniest interactions within the game. Kinda makes sense that in Fire Emblem Fates, his daughter is one of my favorites in that game. Wish they had done him better though, but oh well. Either way, even with that, he's still one of the best characters in Fire Emblem Awakening. Number 1. That being said, that's all for my video. Like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you next time.